All right, and welcome back. We're going to pick up where we are in Unit 5.04. So we're going to be talking about decision structures, and today we're going to look at specifically the if-then statement. The if-then statement is probably the most important computer programming concept you're going to learn. It's the basis for everything we're going to do moving forward. If you can get the if-then statement down, then you have truly understood kind of how the computer thinks in terms of is it true or is it false. And then based on whether it's true or false, the computer is going to make a decision. So that's why they call it a decision structure. So here, this is straight from our notes. We're going to take a look at the if-then statement that's in the PowerPoint. This is a kind of helpful exercise here. The key to the if-then statement is that you're checking to see if a condition is true. All right, and if that condition is true, then you're going to do something. All right, so that's the key here with the if-then statement. If something is true, then you do something. So notice what's happening here. The computer is making a decision based on whether what we call the condition is true. I'll usually call that the initial condition. If the initial condition is true, you do it. Otherwise, you skip this statement and just jump straight to the end. All right, so that's the key here. Everything is based on whether that condition is true. And as we looked at in class, if we kind of go through our notes, you'll see that we also have the if, then, else. Again, this functions very similarly. So for example, if A is equal to B, if this top part here is true, then we do what's in here. Else, we do what's in here. All right, so for example, if A is equal to B, then that means C would be 10. Otherwise, C would be 13. Right, and this should be pretty straightforward. You can kind of understand the wording, and again, the else is a big indicator. And if you're having trouble understanding this, just think about it from the English perspective. Like when you say the statement, if A equals B, then C equals 10. Else, C is just automatically equal to 13 at that point. All right. And so now that we kind of understand this, let's look at some other forms of the if-then that we've talked about in class. We also have what's called the nested if-then-else. And you can see here that the if-then is up top. This is a first condition. And notice how here else, there's another if-then that we check in here. We've already talked about this in class where if the first condition, if the int num equal 10 is not true, then we come down and we have to check this condition. All right, notice how this is nested inside of this else if. That's why they call it a nested if-then statement. And then finally, the other version that we had that we talked about in class is the else if ladder, the if then else if ladder. And again, you can kind of see it looks like a ladder going all the way down. All right, and the key here is that if one of these happens to be true, then we jump out of all of these statements. In other words, if we check all of these statements, we check them in order, and by checking them in order, once one of them is true, we immediately jump out and just jump out of the if statement at that point. And here's a very good example of kind of what that looks like. This if then else. All right. So let's take a look and let's see what this looks like in a program. How will we type this in a program? What does this look like in coding? So here we have a very simple program, and I want it to be when you enter a number between 1 and 10, certain things are going to come up based on what number is entered by the user. All right, so we want something to happen based on what is entered by the user. So if we look at our coding, right now I have no coding, but so let's put some coding in here. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a variable. I'm going to call that variable int num, and we're going to make this a integer. All right, so int num as integer. And we're not going to give it any value. So this has an initial value of 0 because I didn't give it any initial value. Now what I want is when the user clicks on button 1, we're going to take in the value from text box 1, and that's going to go into my int num. So it's going to look something like this. Int num is equal to text box 1 dot text. And again, this will take in the input to int num from text box 1. Again, just doing our comments like we've done before. Now, what I want to do is I want to compare this number. So here's what I want to do. I want to say if the number is less than 0, I want a message box to pop up saying, hey, your number is below 0. If the number is from 1 to 4, I want it to pop up a message box saying your number is too low. If it's 5, I want it to say your number is in the middle. And then 6 to 10, I want it to say the number is too large. And then finally, if it's above 10, I want another message box saying, hey, you went above. So let me kind of show you kind of how this would look like. All right, so here we have my int num. I want to say if the int num is less than 0, then. This is our classic if-then statement. You should be able to identify that the int num right here, this is my condition. So I'm checking to see if the int num is less than 0. If it is less than 0, in other words, if this condition is true, then I'm going to display a message box. All right, and I want that message box to simply say something like, your number is below 0, something like that. All right. Now we also want to check to see if it's from 1 to 4. All right. So I guess this means this needs to be less than or equal to 0. So let me put that in there real quick. That's the less than or equal to sign. I'm sorry. That's the less than and equal to sign. All right. And then I want to say else if, again, this is our else if now. So else if int num is greater than or equal to 1 and int num is less than 5. Now, as we learned a little bit later on in this section, the and right here is what we call a compound Boolean expression. And so what this is going to do is this is going to check both of these conditions here. And if you remember from the very beginning, when we first started the semester, we talked about logic gates, and we talked about the AND gate. You remember in the AND gate, the only way for the AND gate, the output, to be 1 is if both the inputs were 1. And so here I want you to see the same thing works for this AND keyword right here. If both of these conditions are true, then we do something in between. You should see here my condition is if the int num is greater than or equal to 1 and if the int num is less than 5. All right, so that means both of those have to be true. And then we'll write another message box. We'll say messagebox.show. All right, and we'll say your number is too small. All right, just something to say there. Let's put another one. I want to say else if the int num is equal to 5. All right, again, so you can see here, this one is checking to see if the int num is equal to 5. So here, I'll write some comments to help you out. So here I'm checking if int num is less than 0. Checking if int num is between 1 and 4. And then finally here I'm checking if the int num is equal to 5. Again, these are all conditions. I'm checking my condition. And then if that's true, then I'm doing something based on that condition being true. Right? So everything is based on that condition. So here I want the message box to say something like, let's say your number is in the middle. All right, that sounds fine. And then one more. So this will be another else if int num is greater than 5 and int num is less than, and we'll say less than 11 because we want it to go up to 10. All right, we want the user to be able to put a number between 1 and 10. And here we're going to say, here we're going to be checking if int num is between 6 and 10. And I want you guys to notice a couple things here. Notice how I'm checking to see if the int num is greater than 5. What's greater than 5? 6. And so therefore, if it's between, it's kind of 6, and then what's less than 11 is 10, so it's between 6 and 10. And then here I'll write a message box that'll say your number is too big. All right. And finally, we want to also do a check to see if the number is greater than 10. All right, so we'll do one more else if. Else, and we can just say this as else if we wanted to, because this is the last thing we're going to check. You could also do an else if and check to see if it is actually greater than 10. So we'll do the else if just to kind of show you how that looks like. We'll say else if int num is greater than 10, then, again, notice the difference here. This one is, it's greater than 10. This one is checking if it's less than 11. So this one here includes 10. This one here does not include 10. All right? And this is checking if int num is is greater than 10. And if that's true, we'll have another message box here that just simply says your number is greater than 10. All right. Now, what's missing? There's something missing in this program to make sure it doesn't crash. Can you identify what that is? Let me pause the video here to give you just a quick second to see if you can figure out what that is. So pause the video, see if you can figure out what's missing in this program to prevent it from crashing. Alright, and hopefully you had a couple seconds to kind of think through that. What you should have noticed is there's no try-catch, right? Without a try-catch, that means that the program can still possibly crash. In other words, the user could enter in a string instead of a number and crash the program. So let's write our try-catch in here just so we can make sure nothing crashes. We're going to move all this coding into the try right there. Alright, and then finally we're going to write a little message box in the catch. Remember, we need to write a message box here so we can tell the user what the error is. And we'll say something like, please input only numbers. Alright, and let's run this and let's kind of see how this looks. It's easy to kind of see it on the coding, but it's much easier to see it when it's actually running. So let me move this a little bit out of the way so you can kind of see the coding again. And let's actually run it. So here's my program right here, and here's all my coding. Let's say I put in a -3. When I click on button 1, I should expect to see this message box pop up right here. Your number is below 0. And there we go. All right, again, all that's happening is it's walking through and it's going through these decisions, these if-then statements, and depending on which one is true, it's going to execute the code underneath. All right, let's do another one. Let's say we have one that's the number 3, not -3, but +3. This one should say your number is too small. All right, and there we go, your number is too small. Let's do number 5, just to test that. And there you go, your number is in the middle. Again, everything is following exactly our coding. And let's say 10. All right, so let's say our number is 10. We should expect to see the message box saying your number is too big, not the message box saying your number is greater than 10. And there we go, we see the one that says your number is too big. And let's just take a really big number. Let's say we take 5,600. And when we click button 1, we should see now we get that your number is greater than 10. So what I want you to see here is that my program is showing a message box based on what the user puts in, and is based off of this if-then statement right here, all right here. All right. Finally, if we put in some letters like AD, I should get my catch. Again, that's just telling me that, hey, the user inputted the wrong information, so therefore we need to catch that and prevent the program from crashing. All right, so this was a pretty simple run-through of what if-then statements are. The best way to learn how to use if-then statements is to practice, 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 and practice. You won't really understand if-then statements if you don't spend some significant time working on them and practicing them. So that concludes for this video, and I hope that you were able to do a little bit of review for your if-then statements.